October 29th, 2025, 1400 hours UTC, the object designated 3I Atlas shifted wavelength signature across the visible spectrum within a 90-minute window. Standard comet behavior predicts gradual color shift over weeks. This shift occurred in minutes. The data came through 3 independent observation platforms simultaneously. The Hubble Space Telescope logged the event at 1411 UTC. The James Webb Space Telescope confirmed at 1413 UTC. The European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope in Chile registered identical readings at 1415 UTC. 3 separate instruments, 3 separate continents, 3 identical results. The transmission lag alone should have prevented synchronization, yet the data matched to within 0.003% variance. No official statement addressed the simultaneity. Why would 3 of the most powerful telescopes on Earth and in orbit all detect the identical phenomenon within the same 4-minute window if the occurrence was gradual or localized? The object's surface temperature reading prior to the event remained constant at approximately 280 Kelvin, equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. This matched predictions for a comet at 1.4 astronomical units from the Sun. The spectral analysis showed water ice signature at 92% composition, consistent with Oort cloud origin models. Standard profile. Nothing indicated deviation from expected behavior. Then the color changed. Blue light dominated the reflected spectrum. Not slightly blue, significantly blue. The color temperature shift implied surface conditions exceeding 5,800 Kelvin. That is equivalent to the surface temperature of our Sun. The object was receiving heat from 1.4 astronomical units away. Standard solar radiation at that distance delivers approximately 370 watts per square meter. Insufficient to produce the observed temperature signature by any known mechanism of passive reflection or sublimation. The object appeared to be generating internal heat, or radiating it, or both simultaneously. The initial analysis filtered through standard channels took 14 hours before reaching public distribution. 14 hours for 3 observations to be verified, cross-referenced, and released through NASA's official channels. During that time, the observations circulated through restricted networks only. Astrophysicists at major universities reported receiving encrypted notifications stating data was under temporary embargo pending verification. The embargo period listed in the notification was 48 hours. Standard protocol for anomalous findings is 4 hours maximum before preliminary release. Why the extended hold? By 2200 hours UTC on October 29th, the color had shifted further. The original readings showed a wavelength peak at approximately 470 nanometers. This is the boundary between blue and violet. New readings from the European Space Agency's SOHO satellite showed wavelength peak at 410 nanometers. Pure violet spectrum. Temperature implication climbed to approximately 7,000 Kelvin. That exceeds our Sun's surface temperature by 1,200 Kelvin. The object was not simply reflecting sunlight anymore. Reflection does not produce color shift of this magnitude. Some mechanism was altering either the composition of material being ejected from the surface or the internal energy state of the object itself. The mechanism responsible remained unidentified. The ESA released a preliminary statement at 2330 UTC, stating only that unusual spectral characteristics were observed and are under analysis. The statement included no numerical values, no temperatures, no wavelength data, no timeline for further information. This stands in direct contradiction to ESA protocol, which requires specific parameters in preliminary notices to allow peer review networks rapid assessment. Why were the numbers withheld? By October 30th, midnight UTC, the phenomenon had accelerated. The object began ejecting material at unprecedented rates. Ground-based spectroscopy from Mount Hopkins Observatory in Arizona detected emission lines consistent with ionized carbon. Carbon ionization occurs at extremely high temperatures, exceeding 10,000 Kelvin. The ejection rate calculated to approximately 2 million tons per hour. For comparison, the most active comet ever observed in our solar system, Hale-Bopp in 1997, never exceeded 1 million tons per hour during peak activity. The object was outgassing at double the maximum rate ever recorded, and this rate was accelerating rather than declining as the object moved away from the Sun. The physics contradicted itself. Comets brighten as they approach the sun and fade as they recede. This object was approaching perihelion on October 29th, meaning it was already beginning its recession curve. Yet brightness was increasing, outgassing rate was increasing, color shift was continuing toward higher energy wavelengths. The standard model predicted decline. The observations recorded acceleration. The Mount Hopkins team submitted their preliminary findings to the Astrophysical Journal at 0600 UTC on October 30th. Standard submission procedure for time-critical observations. The journal acknowledged receipt, but flagged the submission as requiring extended review period due to extraordinary claims. Extended review for a straightforward spectroscopic measurement means additional security clearance. Someone had contacted the journal before publication, someone with authority to delay peer review. The Mount Hopkins team never received official notification of who made the contact or why additional security was deemed necessary. By October 31st, 20 hours after the initial color shift, the International Astronomical Union's Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams had released only one brief circular, CBAT 25168. The circular stated simply that 3I Atlas exhibits anomalous photometric behavior. Observations continue. No parameters, no timeline, no advisory to the astronomical community to prioritize observations. A routine comet discovery receives more detailed notification than this. Why was the bulletin intentionally vague? Independent observatories began reporting their own data through back channels. The data converged on a single impossible conclusion. The object's luminosity had increased by a factor of 5,000 in 72 hours. Standard models predicted a luminosity increase of approximately 400% at maximum during comparable approach phase. The observation was 12 times greater than maximum predicted value. The discrepancy could not be attributed to measurement error. The data came from 13 independent sources operating on 3 continents. 13 observers using different instruments could not simultaneously produce identical error in the same direction. This was not instrumental artifact. This was real. The question became inescapable. What mechanism could produce such energy output from an object in deep space with no apparent fuel source and no visible propulsion signature? The information flow pattern triggered secondary analysis track. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office activated at 0200 hours UTC on November 1st. Standard activation occurs only for near-Earth objects on collision trajectories with less than 6 months warning time. 3I Atlas would not reach closest approach to Earth until December 19th, 5 weeks away. Standard protocol activation time would be December 1st at earliest. The activation was 31 days early. No official statement explained the early activation. The office released a single statement. 3I Atlas continues on predicted trajectory toward perihelion. October 29th has already occurred. Object is now in recession phase. Spectral anomalies detected are under analysis. No threat assessment changes at this time. Continued monitoring by International Coordination Task Force. The statement confirmed the color shift had been observed officially. It confirmed spectral anomalies. It confirmed task force was monitoring. It said nothing about energy source. It said nothing about temperature implications. It said nothing about the impossible brightness increase. The statement was technically accurate while communicating effectively nothing. This is the standard method for information control when full suppression has become impossible. Confirm the minimum, explain nothing, maintain ambiguity. The public reads the statement and oscillates between they confirmed it, so it must be serious, and they said it's routine, so it must not be serious. The ambiguity itself becomes the message. The statement also contained precise timing. October 29th has already occurred. This was emphasis placed on past tense. The implication was that the anomalies were historical event now concluding. In fact, the data showed anomalies accelerating, not concluding. The statement was deliberately misleading in its framing of temporal sequence. The past tense was factually incorrect but strategically useful. It positioned the phenomenon as concluded rather than ongoing. It positioned monitoring as routine maintenance rather than crisis response. It positioned continued analysis as normal procedure rather than emergency investigation. The deception was transparent to anyone reading carefully. The question became whether the general public reads carefully or accepts surface framing. The answer historically is that surface framing dominates public perception. The official statement had worked. The crisis narrative was suppressed in favor of routine narrative, despite observable evidence contradicting the routine framing. Yet contradictions continued to accumulate. The space agencies had activated emergency protocols. Equipment reallocation was unprecedented in scope. International coordination had been elevated to highest political levels. Congressional briefings had been scheduled. Presidential national security staff had been notified. All of this activity contradicts routine narrative profoundly. The gap between stated position and actual behavior widens with each day. Eventually, gaps of that magnitude become impossible to bridge through information management alone. By November 2nd, the color had shifted into the ultraviolet spectrum. Ultraviolet radiation cannot be seen by human eye. Ground-based optical telescopes cannot observe ultraviolet directly. Only space-based ultraviolet sensors detect this wavelength range. The data came exclusively from UV-capable satellites. The data was classified immediately upon receipt. Academic astronomers with time allocation on these satellites found their data access revoked. Astronomers who had submitted requests to analyze UV observations were informed their requests were denied pending classification review. Classification review for scientific data typically requires 3 to 6 months. The review timeline was never established. The question became urgent. If the most fundamental characteristic of the object, its color and thermal signature, was now only observable through classified channels, what was the actual status of public knowledge of this object? We were observing it together. 3 separate teams on 3 continents had confirmed the color shift in real time. The data existed in multiple locations simultaneously, yet the data became classified at the point where independent verification became most critical. This is where 2 parallel investigations became apparent. One investigation tracked the object itself. The other investigated the information infrastructure surrounding the object. The second investigation would prove more significant than the first. The temperature trajectory required immediate examination. The object had moved from 280 Kelvin to implied temperature exceeding 10,000 Kelvin in approximately 72 hours. No known mechanism could produce this magnitude of heating through passive solar radiation alone. The object would require internal energy generation. The energy required calculated to approximately 30 terawatts sustained. 30 terawatts is equivalent to the output of 15,000 commercial nuclear reactors operating at full capacity continuously. A comet is a ball of ice and rock. It contains no known mechanism for generating such energy. Yet the data clearly indicated such energy was being released. An alternative explanation existed. Perhaps the object was not a comet at all. Perhaps the object had been misidentified from initial discovery. Perhaps the object was technology of unknown origin. This possibility entered formal scientific discussion for the first time on November 3rd at a closed meeting of the American Astronomical Society. The meeting was restricted to members with Level 3 security clearance. The discussion was documented only in classified minutes. The decision emerged through official channels the following day. All further astronomical analysis of 3I Atlas would be conducted exclusively through the restricted task force. No independent research would be permitted. No academic papers would be submitted to journals. No presentations would be given at conferences. The restriction was justified on grounds of avoiding premature public alarm pending verification of findings. This is bureaucratic language for information suppression. When the stated reason contradicts the action, we suppress data to avoid alarm about data. The true motivation lies elsewhere. The true motivation appeared to be timeline protection. If the object's characteristics continued accelerating on the current trajectory, observable phenomena would become undeniable within weeks. By restricting all public information flow now, officials could maintain narrative control until either phenomena ceased or public observation became inevitable. The strategy is contingent on maintaining information segregation until a clear policy emerges. Once public observation is inescapable, policy becomes irrelevant. Everyone will see the phenomenon directly. This timeline compression created incentive for accelerated analysis within classified channels. The task force shifted to continuous 24-hour operations on November 3rd. All member space agencies contributed additional resources. Existing observation schedules for other astronomical phenomena were canceled. Equipment was reallocated to 3I Atlas monitoring exclusively. The scale of resource reallocation suggested decision-makers possessed information indicating imminent critical developments. What information justified mobilizing multinational space infrastructure on emergency protocols? The answer lay partially in data that would not be released for days, but fragments emerged through official channels inadvertently. A NASA administrator speaking to a small group of congressional staff members on November 4th mentioned that the object demonstrates characteristics inconsistent with known astronomical phenomena in ways that require elevated response protocols. The phrase was not intended for public consumption. It appeared in an internal memorandum that leaked to media within hours. NASA demanded the memorandum be retracted. The damage control was immediate but incomplete. The word elevated had entered public consciousness. By November 4th evening, the public had begun to notice. Online astronomy communities shared the leaked memorandum. Independent observers with amateur equipment pointed telescopes at the coordinates and attempted to observe the object directly. What they observed shocked them. The object was visibly brighter than it had been 48 hours prior. The brightness change was obvious even to amateur equipment. This was not specialist detection requiring specialized instruments. This was visible magnitude shift apparent to anyone with a 6-inch telescope. The color shift they observed was visible too. The object appeared blue, not subtle blue, distinctly blue. Blue is not a color associated with comets. Comets appear yellow or white due to reflected sunlight and dust composition. Blue indicates either extreme temperature or highly ionized material. Either interpretation contradicts standard comet characteristics. The amateur observation community began to organize. Observations poured in from dozens of locations. The data was shared through public forums instantly. The classified information systems had lost their exclusive access to knowledge. This moment marks the critical juncture. The information split became irreversible. Official channels possessed restricted data. Public channels possessed observable reality. As long as both remained consistent or near consistent, narrative could be maintained through selective information release. The moment they diverged beyond reconciliation, credibility of official channels deteriorated. By November 4th, the divergence was absolute. The official response to public observation emergence came through the Planetary Defense Coordination Office on November 4th at 1900 UTC. A statement was issued without press conference. The statement was formatted as routine advisory. 3I Atlas continues on predicted trajectory toward perihelion. October 29th has already occurred. Object is now in recession phase. Spectral anomalies detected are under analysis. No threat assessment changes at this time. Continued monitoring by International Coordination Task Force. The statement confirmed the color shift had been observed officially. It confirmed spectral anomalies. It confirmed task force was monitoring. It said nothing about energy source. It said nothing about temperature implications. It said nothing about the impossible brightness increase. The statement was technically accurate while communicating effectively nothing. This is the standard method for information control when full suppression has become impossible. Confirm the minimum, explain nothing, maintain ambiguity. The public reads the statement and oscillates between they confirmed it, so it must be serious, and they said it's routine, so it must not be serious. The ambiguity itself becomes the message. The object continued to brighten through the night of November 4th and into November 5th. Observations from Chile, Australia, and South Africa converged on identical readings. The brightness increase had continued exponentially. The rate of increase itself was increasing. This is acceleration of acceleration. Second derivative of luminosity flux positive and expanding. This is the signature of runaway energy release. Something fundamental was changing in the object's state. Whether that change was internal instability or external technology-driven process remained undetermined. The energy budget analysis began in parallel with the brightness monitoring. If the object was radiating heat through visible spectrum at the observed rates, total energy output calculated to approximately 50 terawatts by November 5th at midday UTC. 50 terawatts. That is equivalent to the total electrical generating capacity of the entire United States multiplied by 40. That is more power than all human civilization generates through all sources combined. A piece of rock and ice in interstellar space was generating power output greater than industrial civilization of an entire planet. The physics of this situation exceeded standard astronomical understanding. The peer review process for this data had already been compromised. The journals had blocked publication. The conferences had canceled sessions. The task force had seized control of information flow. Within hours, unofficial analysis appeared on research blogs and physics forums. The amateur astronomical networks had begun their own spectroscopic analysis. The data was inferior to professional data, but sufficient for first-order conclusions. Every independent analysis reached identical conclusion. The object was not behaving according to standard physics. The object was not behaving according to exotic comet physics. The object was not behaving according to any known natural mechanism. By November 5th at 1800 UTC, 3 separate nations had convened emergency sessions of their security councils. The United States National Security Council met at the White House. Russian Federation Security Council met in Moscow. China's Central Military Commission met in Beijing. The meetings were classified. No official announcements were made. The fact that 3 separate military security structures reached activation threshold simultaneously indicated they had all received identical intelligence or reached identical conclusions independently. Neither possibility was comforting. The speed of international response exceeded normal protocol by factor of 10. Normal national security coordination for space phenomena involves days of diplomatic messaging. This response occurred within hours. The accelerated timeline suggested either prior knowledge of the possibility or extreme confidence in the threat assessment. The question of threat itself remained undefined. Threat of what? Contact, collision, energy release. The classified communications did not specify. The task force issued secondary statement at 2000 UTC on November 5th. The statement was shorter than the first. 3I Atlas exhibits acceleration consistent with outgassing from cometary material. Analysis continues. No timeline provided. No parameters offered. The statement retreated from previous position. That object was in recession phase. Recession phase objects do not accelerate. The new statement implicitly acknowledged acceleration but attributed it to outgassing. Outgassing from what? Water vapor, carbon dioxide, cyanide compounds. The statement provided no specifics. The lack of specifics suggested analysis was still incomplete, or incomplete results were being withheld. By November 6th, the situation had solidified into stalemate. Official channels maintained information restriction. Public channels had mobilized global observation network. Thousands of independent observers were tracking the object. The data quality from professional sources was superior, but the volume from amateur sources created redundancy. If professional data was suppressed, amateur data would still permit reconstruction. The information suppression strategy had become mathematically impossible. The phenomenon was too bright, too accessible, too widely observable. Hiding it through compartmentalization no longer worked. The strategy shifted. Instead of hiding the phenomenon, official channels began managing narrative about the phenomenon. The transition marked critical psychological inflection point. Acceptance of phenomenon as real and undeniable. Shift to controlling interpretation of phenomenon instead of controlling information about phenomenon. This is the moment where crisis management strategy shifted from suppression to framing. What does the phenomenon mean? How should public interpret it? Who controls that interpretation? These questions become central as information control becomes impossible.